I never anticipated that a casual family hike could lead to the unraveling of so many hidden threads. The air was crisp, the late autumn leaves crunching underfoot, and I was feeling the calm that nature so easily provides. My husband's nephew, Caleb, a quiet and thoughtful young man in his early 20s, had joined us as he often did, bringing his usual easygoing charm. Caleb was someone I'd known since he was just a boy, but over the years he'd grown into a more complex presence. His interactions carried a quiet intensity, and though he often seemed lost in thought, he had a sharp sense of humor that he wielded with careful precision. It was a perfect day for hiking, a bit chilly, but that only made the air feel fresher, sharper. My husband had taken the lead up the trail, his head focused forward as he chatted about various things he'd read, making Caleb and me the natural pair to bring up the rear. It wasn't the first time we'd been alone on a family outing, but something felt different today, almost as if an unspoken agreement had passed between us to share this time with the kind of openness we usually avoided. We walked side by side, at ease with the quiet that blanketed us, the sounds of our footsteps mingling with the gentle rustle of branches above. After a few minutes, Caleb started talking about his plans, his dreams, and his recent travels. His voice, usually so reserved, carried a softer tone, each word heavy with meaning. He spoke of the places he wanted to see, his desire to push past the comfort of his familiar surroundings, and as he shared these thoughts, I felt a familiar warmth growing between us, an intimacy that was both comforting and unsettling. We had always been close, perhaps even a little closer than others noticed, but this felt new and somehow profound. When he paused, his gaze lingered on me a second too long, his eyes searching, waiting, as if inviting me to share something I hadn't yet allowed myself to say. I found myself drawn in, feeling that subtle urge to reciprocate. Without quite meaning to, I mentioned how much I admired his courage to embrace the unknown, to forge his path in a world that so often expects us to stay confined within predetermined roles. He smiled a small, quiet smile that was all his own and nodded. "There's just something about knowing you can rely on someone," he said, his voice thoughtful, his gaze flicking away from mine as he considered the words. "I think it's important to have someone who gets you, don't you?" "Yes," I replied, the answer leaving my lips before I had time to second guess. I could sense his hesitation, feel the weight of the question he hadn't yet asked, but something in his expression told me that he was as unsure of it as I was. We walked in silence for a while, our quiet breaths filling the spaces where conversation had once flowed, until finally he stopped. I halted beside him, feeling the cold bite of the wind on my face as I glanced up to see the clouds rolling in, dark and imposing. "We're going off the main trail," he murmured, pointing to a faint path that veered away from the familiar course. "There's a view here I've been wanting to show you." I hesitated, glancing around, but the allure of a hidden spot known only to the two of us was too enticing to ignore. My husband was far enough ahead, lost in his own world, and wouldn't notice our detour, I thought. So I followed Caleb, stepping over rocks and roots as he led me up a narrow incline, our steps instinctively falling into sync. The higher we climbed, the quieter the forest became, until we reached a small, secluded clearing overlooking the valley. The vista was breathtaking, the golden hues of autumn blanketing the hills, a slow river winding through the trees below like a silver thread against the dark earth. I was lost in the beauty of it when Caleb stepped closer, and when I turned to face him, the intensity in his eyes startled me. "Thank you for coming with me," he said quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. His eyes searched mine, the familiar warmth now tinged with something deeper, more complex, a feeling I couldn't quite place but that sent a shiver down my spine. He held my gaze, and in that quiet moment, I felt the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us. There was something raw, something vulnerable in his expression, as if he'd stripped away every layer, every mask he wore, leaving only his truest self exposed. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. What was there to say? I felt a surge of emotions I hadn't anticipated: confusion, curiosity, and undeniably, an unexpected thrill that both frightened and excited me. Caleb took a step closer, and though he didn't touch me, the air between us felt charged, humming with an energy that seemed to drown out everything else. My heart hammered in my chest, the sound echoing in my ears, as his gaze dropped from my eyes to my lips and back up again. I felt pinned in place, caught between a deep-rooted instinct to step back and the undeniable urge to stay exactly where I was. He broke the silence first, his voice low and tentative. I know it sounds strange, but I feel like we understand each other in a way most people don't. I don't think I've ever been able to talk to anyone the way I talk to you. His words were almost confessional, as if he were admitting something he hadn't even fully realized himself until that moment. He swallowed, his eyes flicking away briefly before meeting mine again. I can't explain it, but I wanted to say it. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with trepidation. I knew exactly what he meant. The connection we shared had always felt different, deeper, but I'd brushed it off as familiarity. Yet standing here with no one around, no distractions, I couldn't deny that there was something far more complicated simmering beneath the surface. I feel it too, I whispered, my voice barely audible, afraid to give life to words that might change everything. He smiled, a soft, almost pained smile, and took another step toward me, closing the gap between us. I could feel the warmth of his body despite the cold wind, and I was acutely aware of how close he was, how a single move could bridge the distance between us. I felt trapped between wanting to lean in and knowing I shouldn't, that I couldn't. But the pull was there, strong and undeniable, and I knew he felt it too. Maybe we should head back, I managed, though the words sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to agree or to ignore the suggestion entirely. Caleb's hand lifted, hesitating for a fraction of a second, before he gently brushed a strand of hair from my face. The touch was soft, feather-light, but it sent a jolt through me, and I couldn't stop the shiver that ran down my spine. His fingers lingered a moment too long, his eyes darkening as he watched me, and I realized I was holding my breath. He let out a slow breath, and his hand fell back to his side, though the tension between us remained, crackling like static in the air. I know we shouldn't, he began, his voice rough, laden with a depth of emotion I hadn't seen before. But I can't help it. I feel like there's something here that I can't just ignore, and I don't think you can either. My mind raced, grappling with the weight of his words. Everything in me screamed that this was dangerous, that we were treading on thin ice, but another part of me, a part that had lain dormant for too long, whispered that maybe it was okay to let go, just this once, to see where this path would lead. Caleb, I whispered, the word heavy with uncertainty, but he held up his hand, a gentle yet firm gesture, as if he was trying to stop himself as much as he was trying to stop me. Let's be here like this for a moment, he murmured, his voice filled with quiet urgency. Just this once. Just to see. I nodded, barely understanding what I was agreeing to, but feeling as if I couldn't resist even if I wanted to. We stood there, close enough to feel each other's breaths mingling in the cool air, the forest silent around us as if the entire world had stopped. As the seconds passed, the silence between us grew heavier, filled with words that neither of us dared to speak. Caleb's gaze held mine, his eyes flickering with something both fierce and tender, a longing that mirrored the turmoil within me. I felt the weight of that unspoken pull, as if it were a tangible force between us, and every fiber of my being was acutely aware of how easy it would be to close the remaining distance, just one step, one moment of surrender. But then his hand rose again, reaching out slowly, hesitantly, until his fingers brushed against mine. It was a tentative touch, his fingertips barely grazing my hand, but the contact was electric. I couldn't stop the shiver that ran through me, or the way my breath caught in my throat. His hand lingered, resting against mine, and slowly, as if testing the waters, his fingers intertwined with mine. I looked down, watching our hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine, a warmth that spread through me, igniting a fire I hadn't known was there. I don't know how to explain this, he said, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile intimacy we'd created. I just know that being with you like this, it feels like something I've been waiting for, even though I know it's wrong. I wanted to respond, to say something that would make sense of the emotions swirling inside me, but words failed me. Instead, I found myself squeezing his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the connection we both felt but couldn't fully understand. He looked up, his gaze meeting mine again, and I saw the same vulnerability, the same uncertainty reflected in his eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved, suspended in a world that felt like it existed solely for us. But then, without warning, he took a small, careful step closer, our fingers still intertwined. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears, and I felt the air around us grow thick with tension. I knew I should step back, pull away, say something that would bring us back to reality, but I couldn't move. I was caught, held captive by a feeling that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. "Is this crazy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his face inches from mine. I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and soft, and every nerve in my body was alight with anticipation. I swallowed, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Yes, I managed, my voice trembling, but there was no conviction behind the word. It was as if I were saying it only to fulfill the role I thought I should play, not because I truly wanted him to stop. He smiled faintly, a ghost of a smile, as if he understood. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he leaned in. His hand released mine, moving to rest lightly on my arm, his touch sending a spark through me that made my pulse quicken. I closed my eyes, my breath hitching as his fingers trailed up my arm, so gentle yet so intentional, leaving a path of warmth in their wake. When his hand finally reached my shoulder, he paused, as if giving me one last chance to pull away, to put an end to the moment that had spiraled beyond our control. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Instead, I felt myself lean into his touch, a silent invitation that felt as natural as breathing. Caleb's hand moved to my face, his fingers brushing my cheek as he tilted my head up to meet his gaze. His eyes held a depth of emotion I hadn't expected, a raw intensity that took my breath away. Slowly, hesitantly, he leaned closer, his face so near to mine that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, the faint scent of the forest mingling with the subtle scent of him. And then, finally, his lips met mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if we were both afraid to fully give in to the feelings that had been building between us. But as the seconds passed, the hesitation melted away, replaced by a fierce, undeniable need that neither of us could ignore. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I felt a rush of warmth flood through me, an overwhelming sense of rightness that seemed to drown out every doubt, every fear. I responded instinctively, my hands reaching up to hold him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against mine, the way his heart raced beneath my fingertips. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, more intense, and I felt myself falling, losing myself in him, in the moment, in the quiet, secret world we'd created. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, I saw the same mixture of wonder and fear reflected in his eyes that I felt in my own heart. We stood there, our foreheads resting against each other, our breaths mingling in the cool air, as we tried to process the enormity of what had just happened. The forest around us was silent, the only sounds our shallow breaths, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. It felt as if we were the only two people in existence, suspended in time, wrapped in a moment that was both beautiful and frightening. Caleb's hand still rested on my face, his thumb gently brushing my cheek as he searched my eyes, as if looking for some reassurance, some confirmation that what we just shared was as meaningful to me as it was to him. "We can't. We shouldn't," I whispered, though the words felt empty, like an echo of something I thought I should say but didn't truly feel. "I know," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, "but it's too late now, isn't it?" I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. There was no going back, no undoing the kiss, no erasing the feelings that had simmered beneath the surface for so long. What we'd shared was real, and though it was complicated, even forbidden, it had ignited something within me that I couldn't deny. For a moment we stood there in silence, our hands still intertwined, our faces close as we absorbed the weight of what had just happened. But then, slowly, reality began to seep back in, and with it came the realization of all the things we'd set into motion, all the consequences that would ripple out from this single, stolen moment. "I don't know how we move forward from this," I murmured, my voice trembling as I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "What do we do now?" He took a deep breath, his hand squeezing mine as he tried to steady himself. Maybe we just take it one day at a time," he said, his tone soft, filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Maybe we don't need all the answers right now." I nodded, feeling the sting of unshed tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. It was true there were no easy answers, no way to untangle the mess of emotions we'd both created, All we could do was face the uncertainty together, no matter how difficult it would be. We started back down the trail, our steps slow, reluctant, as if by moving forward we were leaving something precious behind. The connection between us, that raw, undeniable pull, lingered in the air. And though neither of us spoke, I felt his presence beside me as a comforting weight, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. When we reached the end of the trail, Caleb hesitated, his gaze lingering on me one last time, a silent question hanging between us. I opened my mouth to say something, anything to reassure him, but the words died on my lips. There was nothing left to say. We had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, and now we had to live with the choices we'd made. As he walked away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow, an ache deep in my chest that reminded me of the beauty and fragility of what we'd shared. It was a bittersweet feeling, a reminder of the complexity of love and desire, and as I watched him disappear down the path, I knew that this moment, this memory, would stay with me forever.